hammered against Imani Cross's apartment window like accusations she couldn't answer. She sat on the edge of her bed at 11:47 p.m., still wearing her scrubs, the fabric stiff with dried sweat and the antiseptic smell of 12 hours at Grady Memorial Hospital. Her feet throbbed. Her back ached. But it was her heart that hurt most. The studio apartment felt smaller tonight. Medical bills from her mother's treatment in Baton Rouge covered the kitchen counter in neat, devastating stacks. $847 due. $1,200 due. $623 due. The numbers blurred together like the rain streaking down the glass. She'd worked a double shift again, covered for Shayla who'd called in sick, and still couldn't see the bottom of the debt. Her phone sat in her palm, Darius's contact photo staring back at her. 3 years together, and lately she'd been talking to his voicemail more than his actual voice. Cancelled plans. Short texts. The way he'd stopped looking at her like she mattered. Tonight, alone and aching, Imani needed him. I needed to feel wanted. I needed to remember what it felt like when love didn't hurt. Her fingers moved across the screen, vulnerability making her bold. Baby, I need you right now. I'm ovulating and wet. She hit send before courage abandoned her. The message disappeared into the digital void. Imani exhaled, setting the phone down, already regretting her desperation. Then she glanced at the screen. Her blood turned to ice. The message hadn't gone to Darius Two Hearts. It had gone to an unknown number. An international code she didn't recognize. +82. Oh God. Oh God, no. Her hands shook as she grabbed the phone, staring at her mistake like it might undo itself through sheer force of will. The 3 dots appeared immediately. Someone was typing. Imani's heart slammed against her ribs. Her breath came short. She watched those dots pulse like a countdown to humiliation. The message appeared. Who are you? Cold. Precise. Each word perfectly spaced like the sender measured every syllable before releasing it into the world. Imani stared at those 3 words, her exhaustion forgotten, replaced by something she couldn't name. Not quite fearful. Not quite curious. Something that made her skin prickle with awareness that her life had just shifted in a direction she couldn't see yet. What she didn't know was that this man controlled an empire built on blood and shadows. And he never forgot a message. Morning light cut through the hospital corridors with the kind of brightness that exposed everything. Imani moved through her rounds at Grady Memorial with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, adjusting IVs, holding the hand of Mrs. Patterson in 304 who cried every morning for a daughter who never visited. You're gonna be just fine, Imani whispered, smoothing the elderly woman's silver hair. I promise you're not alone. This was why she'd become a nursing assistant. Not for the $16.50 an hour that barely covered rent. Not for the 12-hour shifts that destroyed her feet and back. But for these moments when her presence meant someone didn't face their fear alone. Her supervisor, Linda, caught her at the nurse's station. Imani, you picked up Shayla's shift again? My mom's medical bills. Baby, you can't save everyone by killing yourself. Linda's dark eyes held concern that felt like mothering. When's the last time you slept a full night? Imani couldn't remember. Her phone buzzed during lunch break. Her mother's voice came through weak but determined. Imani, baby, you sent too much money again. I told you. Mama, please. Let me help you. You're supposed to be saving for nursing school, not taking care of your grown mama. You took care of me my whole life. Imani's throat tightened. It's my turn. After the call, she stared at her phone's message history. Darius hadn't responded to her text from last night. Not the one she'd meant to send him, anyway. 3 weeks ago, he'd cancelled their anniversary dinner. 2 weeks ago, he'd stopped saying, I love you, at the end of calls. Last week, he'd been too busy to see her at all. But the wrong number, the international contact, had responded again this morning. *, I hope your night has improved. *. Imani had apologized profusely, explaining the mistake, the exhaustion, the humiliation. His responses had been unexpected. Understanding. Almost kind. She shouldn't have kept texting a stranger. But something about his words felt like a conversation with someone who actually listened. Across Atlanta, in the presidential suite of the St. Regis, Seo-Jin stood before floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. He wore a black suit tailored to fit like armor, his dark hair swept back from a face that made people look twice, once in attraction, once in instinctive recognition of danger. Min-jun, his second-in-command, spoke rapid Korean while 3 other men in expensive suits waited for Seo-Jin's response. Business. Territory disputes. A shipment that needed handling with violence barely leashed beneath diplomatic language. Seo-Jin's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, another message from the woman who'd accidentally exposed her vulnerability to a stranger. Min-jun noticed. Sir, the meeting. One moment. Seo-Jin's voice carried the kind of quiet authority that made men with guns obey without question. He studied Imani's profile picture, a woman with rich brown skin, natural hair pulled back, exhausted eyes that still managed to smile. Her messages revealed a life of struggle, loyalty, dreams deferred. She worked herself to exhaustion for a mother she loved and a boyfriend who didn't deserve her desperation. Seo-Jin knew loneliness. He ruled an empire where everyone wanted something from him: power, protection, permission to breathe. Genuine human connection was a luxury men like him couldn't afford. Yet here was this woman, accidentally honest, accidentally real. He typed, "Your boyfriend doesn't deserve that message." He sent it before strategy could override instinct. For the first time in months, Seo-Jin felt something besides the cold weight of his crown. He felt curious. And curiosity, he'd learned long ago, was how the most dangerous things began. 10 days passed in a rhythm Imani hadn't expected. Between double shifts and exhaustion, she found herself texting the stranger with the Korean number. Seo-Jin, he'd told her. Just Seo-Jin. Their conversations felt like breathing after holding her breath for months. He didn't know about her struggles, didn't pity her, didn't need anything from her. When she complained about rude patients, he listened. When she shared her nursing school dreams, he didn't dismiss them as unrealistic. He simply said, "You'll make an excellent nurse. You already are." Seo-Jin found himself doing something unprecedented, checking his phone during meetings. Min-jun had noticed, eyebrows raised when his boss smiled at a message while discussing territory negotiations. The woman's honesty was addictive. She didn't know who he was, what he controlled, how many men answered to his word. To her, he was just someone who listened. On Thursday evening, Imani decided to surprise Darius. Maybe she'd been overthinking his distance. Maybe he was stressed. She stopped at his favorite restaurant, picked up jerk chicken and plantains, and drove to his apartment in East Atlanta with hope flickering against better judgment. She used her key, the one he'd given her on their first anniversary, and pushed open the door. The living room was dark except for candlelight from the bedroom. Music played softly. Imani's heart lifted for one foolish moment before she heard the giggling. A female giggling that wasn't hers. Her feet moved without permission, carrying her toward the bedroom where the door stood half open. What she saw turned her blood to glass, sharp, fragile, already breaking. Darius. In bed. With Shayla. Shayla from work. Shayla called in sick yesterday. Shayla, who Imani had covered for, worked 16 hours so she could rest. They didn't notice her at first, two wrapped in each other. Then Darius looked up. No shame crossed his face. Just annoyance at the interruption. Imani. 3 years. Her voice came out strange, distant, like someone else was speaking. 3 years, Darius. Shayla scrambled for the sheet. Darius stood, not bothering with clothes or excuses. Don't act surprised. You've been working all the time. What did you expect? The takeout bag slipped from Imani's fingers. I was working for us. For my mama. For what? Your little nursing school fantasy? Darius laughed, cruel and familiar, like she'd been deaf to it before. You think I was gonna wait around for you to get your life together? Shayla actually has time for me. My savings. Our savings, he corrected. I'd been taking care of things while you played nurse. Imani's phone was already in her hand, pulling up her bank app with shaking fingers. The numbers on the screen didn't make sense at first. Then they did. $8,247 transferred out over the past 3 months. Transfers she never authorized. Money she'd bled for, worked doubles for, sacrificed sleep and health for. Gone. You stole from me. The words barely made a sound. I borrowed. There's a difference. Darius reached for his pants. Now get out. We're busy. Imani didn't remember leaving. Didn't remember getting to her car. The rain started as she sat in the parking lot, tears and water mixing on her face until she couldn't tell which was which. Everything she believed, love, loyalty, partnership, shattered like the cheap promise it had always been. Her phone felt heavy in her palm. She scrolled through contacts, past family she couldn't burden, past friends who drifted away during her work obsession. Her thumb hovered over one name. Seo-Jin answered on the first ring. Imani? Her voice broke. I don't know why I called you. Where are you? His voice cut through her tears like an anchor in a storm. Steady. Certain. Real. I can't. Tell me where you are. Right now. The black Mercedes arrived within 15 minutes, silent and sleek like a predator. The driver was Korean, older, with kind eyes that asked no questions. He simply opened the door and said, Mr. Han is waiting. Imani should have been afraid. Should have questioned getting into a stranger's car. But nothing made sense anymore, and at least this stranger had never lied to her. The St. Regis rose into the Atlanta skyline like a monument to wealth she'd only seen from the outside. The driver escorted her through a private entrance, into an elevator that required a keycard, up to the presidential suite where the doors opened onto luxury that felt like a different planet. Seo-Jin stood by the windows. When he turned, Imani's breath caught. He was younger than she'd imagined, perhaps 32, with sharp features that photographs would call beautiful and real life called dangerous. Dark eyes that saw too much. A black dress shirt with sleeves rolled to reveal forearms marked with scars that told stories he'd never share in words. He was devastatingly handsome in a way that made her forget, for one moment, why she was crying. Sit. His voice matched his texts, controlled, careful, concerned. He gestured to the cream sofa. Please. Imani sat, feeling absurd in her wrinkled scrubs and rain-soaked hair. Seo-Jin brought tea without asking if she wanted it, set it on the table, then sat across from her, not beside her, giving her space while offering presents. Tell me what happened. So she did. Everything spilled out, Darius, Shayla, the money, 3 years of loving someone who treated her like a convenience. Seo-Jin didn't interrupt. Didn't offer empty platitudes. He simply listened with the kind of attention that felt like being seen for the first time. I'm sorry, Imani finally whispered. I shouldn't have come here. I don't even know you. You know me better than most people. Seo-Jin's hand moved across the table, hovering near hers but not touching. Most people only know what I allow them to see. You know what I choose to share. What do you choose to share? That I understand loneliness. That power and wealth don't fill the silence. That sometimes a wrong number finds exactly the right person. His fingers brushed hers, feather-light, asking permission. When she didn't pull away, he held her hand gently. You deserve someone who sees your worth, Imani. Not someone who steals it. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a pattern that felt like coming home. Dawn meets on the hospital rooftop before her shifts, watching Atlanta wake up in shades of gold. Late-night drives through empty streets in cars that cost more than her annual salary, talking about everything and nothing. He'd bring coffee that was exactly right. She'd bring stories from the hospital that made him almost smile. Imani noticed things she shouldn't ignore. The way men in suits followed him at a distance. How people stepped aside when he walked past, recognition and fear flickering in their eyes. The scars on his knuckles suggested violence as familiar as breathing. The phone calls he'd take in rapid Korean, his voice turning cold and absolute. "What do you do?" she asked one night, in his car overlooking the city. "Really? Business. International trade." "That's not an answer." "That's the answer I can give you right now." Seo-Jin turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Would knowing change this? Change us?" "I don't know what us is." "Neither do I." His honesty felt more intimate than any lie. "But I know I've never felt this before." At the hotel, Minjun cornered Seo-Jin after Imani left. "She's a liability. The men are talking. Your enemies will notice." "Let them notice." "Sir. I said let them notice." Seo-Jin's voice carried a warning that made even Minjun step back. Meanwhile, Darius had started calling. 17 missed calls. Voicemails that shifted from angry to desperate. Imani blocked his number, choosing herself for the first time in 3 years. Then Shayla appeared at the hospital, mascara smudged, voice shaking. "Imani, Darius is in trouble. Real trouble. He's asking about your new boyfriend. The rich one." "Who is he?" The candlelight in Seo-Jin's suite cast shadows that danced like secrets across the walls. Imani had never experienced dinner like this, not the food, though it was extraordinary, but the way he looked at her like she was the only person who'd ever mattered. "Tell me something true," she whispered, wine warming her blood and courage. "I think about you constantly." His honesty was devastating. "In meetings. Making decisions. You're the first thing I want to tell you when something happens." "That's terrifying." "Yes." He reached across the table, fingers tracing her wrist. "It is." What happened next felt inevitable. His mouth on hers, gentle then demanding. Her hands in his hair, pulling him closer. They moved to the bedroom where vulnerability became intimacy, where every touch felt like confession. He was careful with her, reverent, like she might break or disappear. She was bold with him, claiming this moment of feeling wanted, valued, real. Afterward, wrapped in sheets that cost more than her rent, Imani traced the scars on his ribs. "How did you get these?" "Living the life I was born into." His fingers threaded through her hair. "A life you should run from." "What if I don't want to run?" He kissed her forehead, and she felt him smile against her skin. "Then you're braver than I deserve." She fell asleep in his arms, safer than she'd felt in years. Morning arrived with cold sheets and colder reality. Imani woke up alone. Voices speaking rapid Korean filtered through the door, male voices, sharp with urgency. She wrapped herself in Seo-Jin's shirt and opened the bedroom door. 3 men in expensive suits stood in the living room. Armed. Their hands moved to weapons when they saw her before recognizing she wasn't a threat. Minjun approached, his expression respectful but firm. "Miss Cross. Mr. Han had urgent business. I'll arrange a car to take you home." "Where is he?" "Handling matters that require his attention." Minjun's English was perfect, his meaning deliberately vague. "You should leave. Now." Something in his tone triggered alarm. Imani noticed a folder on the desk, partially open. While Minjun spoke into his phone, she moved closer. Korean text covered the documents inside, but photographs needed no translation. Men's faces. Red X's marked over each one. Some photos showed the same men afterward, crime scene images that made her stomach turn. "What is this?" Her voice came out steady despite her shaking hands. Minjun turned, saw what she was holding, and his professional mask slipped for one moment. "You shouldn't have seen that." "Who is he?" "Really?" Silence stretched between them. Then Min-jun made a decision, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Han Seo-Jin is the head of the Baekho syndicate. He controls the Eastern Corridor, from Seoul to Singapore to here. Trafficking, protection, territory. Everything that moves through this part of the world answers to him. The folder slipped from Imani's fingers. No. He's exactly who you thought he was. And exactly who he can never stop being. Min-jun's expression held something like pity. He's a good man in a bad world, Miss Cross. But that doesn't change the world he lives in. Imani's phone was in her hand before conscious thought. She searched for Seo-Jin's name. The results loaded like bullets. Syndicate war claims 15 lives. International task force targets Han family operations. Youngest crime boss in Southeast Asia expands empire. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the phone. She called him. He answered immediately. Imani. Tell me Min-jun is lying. The silence was enough. Tell me. Her voice broke. Tell me you're not what these articles say. Tell me those photos aren't real. Tell me. I can't. His voice was raw, stripped of the control she'd heard in every conversation. I never lied about my business. I just didn't tell you the truth. People are dead because of you. Yes. You kill people. When necessary. Yes. No excuses. No justification. Just brutal honesty. But I never lied about how I feel about you, Imani. That's the only real thing in my life. The only clean thing I have left. She hung up, tears streaming down her face. Across the city, in a parking garage, Darius met with two men whose faces carried the kind of hardness that came from violence as occupation. Money changed hands. Information exchanged. Details about Imani's schedule, her connection to Seo-Jin, weaknesses that could be exploited. The men smiled. Their employer, Kang Tae-hyun, would pay well for this intelligence. Darius pocketed the cash and tried to ignore the guilt. He needed the money. And really, what was Imani doing with a man like that anyway? Imani blocked Seo-Jin's number. Deleted their text history. Tried to erase 3 weeks that had felt like coming alive after years of sleepwalking. She returned to her life, hospital shifts, medical bills, the exhaustion that had defined her before a wrong message changed everything. Except now the exhaustion felt heavier, loneliness sharper, like she'd tasted something beautiful and had to pretend she never wanted it. 3 weeks of silence. 3 weeks of seeing his car following at a distance, protection she hadn't asked for from a man she couldn't forgive. 3 weeks of lying awake remembering how he'd looked at her like she was worth the empire he controlled. On Tuesday evening, after a particularly brutal shift, Imani walked to her car in Grady Memorial's parking deck. The fluorescent lights flickered. Her feet ached. She was thinking about her mother's latest test results when the van pulled up beside her. Everything happened too fast to scream. Hands grabbed her from behind, rough, professional, efficient. A cloth covered her mouth, chemical sweet and suffocating. She fought, landing one solid elbow to someone's ribs before the world tilted sideways into darkness. She woke blindfolded, wrists bound to a metal chair. The air smelled like rust and abandonment, a warehouse, maybe. Voices spoke in Korean around her, casual like discussing weather rather than her fate. Footsteps approached. Someone removed her blindfold. The light stabbed her eyes before they adjusted to see the man in front of her. He was older than Seo-Jin, perhaps 45, with silver threading his dark hair and a smile that made her skin crawl. Imani Cross. Finally, we meet. Who are you? Kang Tae-hyun. He said it like she should recognize the name. I have business with Han Seo-Jin. You're going to help me conclude it. A laptop appeared, its screen showing Seo-Jin in what looked like his hotel suite. His face was perfectly controlled until he saw her bound to the chair. Then something flickered beneath the surface, rage barely leashed, fear carefully hidden. Your weakness, Kang said, tilting the laptop so Seo-Jin could see Imani clearly, costs you your empire. Touch her, Seo-Jin's voice dropped to something sub-zero, and I burn your world to ash. Every territory. Every business. Every person you've ever loved. I will take everything from you and leave you nothing but grief. Dramatic. Kang laughed. But ineffective. You surrender your Atlanta operations, return to Korea, and accept my terms. Or she dies. Imani's heart hammered against her ribs. She wanted to be brave, to tell Seo-Jin not to negotiate, but terror strangled the words in her throat. Seo-Jin's eyes found hers through the screen. I'm coming for you. Do you understand? Stay alive. I'm coming. The call ended. Kang's smile faded. Put her in the back room. He has 6 hours to decide. They dragged her to a smaller space, retired her to a different chair, and left one guard outside the door. Through the thin walls, she heard their conversation in Korean, but body language needed no translation. They laughed. Made throat-cutting gestures. Even if Seo-Jin surrendered, they planned to kill her anyway. Fear threatened to drown her. Imani forced herself to breathe, to think like the nurse who handled emergencies, who didn't panic when patients coded. She tested the restraints. Thick zip ties, but the chair was old metal, unstable. She rocked slowly, carefully, until she tipped sideways. The impact jarred her bones, but her searching fingers found what she'd hoped for, a sharp piece of broken metal from the chair leg. It took 20 minutes of sawing, her wrists bleeding, muscles screaming. The zip tie finally snapped. Imani freed her ankles and stood on shaking legs. The guard outside was smoking, distracted. She had one chance. One moment between captivity and escape. She took it. The St. Regis suite transformed into a war room within minutes of Kang's video call. Men in dark suits filled the space, laptops open, phones pressed to ears, voices rapid fire in Korean and English. Seo-Jin stood at the center like the eye of a hurricane, perfectly still while chaos swirled around him. Street cameras caught the van heading south on Boulevard, one man reported. Lost them near the industrial district. I have 3 possible warehouses, another added, marking locations on a digital map. All owned by shell companies tied to Kang's network. Min-jun approached, his expression grave. Sir, if we move on all 3 locations simultaneously, this becomes open war. The truce between syndicates is already broken. Seo-Jin's voice was icy and violence. He took her. The truce died the moment he put his hands on what's mine. The other families will have to choose sides. Then they choose. Seo-Jin turned, and Min-jun stepped back from what he saw in his boss's eyes. Mobilize everyone. I want her found in the next hour, or Atlanta burns until I find her. And if she's already. She's alive. Seo-Jin said it was like a command to the universe itself. She has to be alive. At the warehouse, Imani's hands were slick with blood from the zip ties, but she was free. She crept toward the door, every nerve screaming. The guard outside was still smoking, his gun holstered. She grabbed a metal pipe from the floor, her nursing assistant arms stronger than they looked from lifting patients. She had one shot. One chance. The door creaked. The guard turned. Imani swung with everything she had. The pipe connected with his skull with a sickening crack. He dropped. She grabbed his gun with shaking hands. She'd never held one before, didn't know if the safety was on, didn't know anything except she needed to run. Then the world exploded. Gunfire erupted outside, automatic weapons, rapid and terrifying. Explosions shook the building. Men screamed. Glass shattered. Smoke began filtering through the warehouse like a living thing. Imani ran deeper into the building, away from the chaos, the gun heavy and foreign in her grip. She found a storage room and crouched behind crates, praying to every god she'd ever heard of. The firefight was methodical. Brutal. Seo-Jin's team moved through the warehouse like surgical instruments, precise, lethal, efficient. Kang's men fell like dominoes. Min-jun took 3 shots to his vest but kept moving. The warehouse became a war zone painted in gunpowder and blood. Seo-Jin moved through it all with terrifying calm, his gun an extension of his will. Anyone between him and Imani simply ceased to exist. He cleared rooms systematically, his heart a hammer in his chest, terror disguised as control. Imani. His voice cut through the smoke and chaos. Imani. She heard him. Recognized the raw desperation beneath the command. Here. I'm here. He found her in the storage room, covered in dust and blood that might have been hers or the guards, clutching a gun she didn't know how to use, alive and whole and the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Seo-Jin, his name broke on her lips. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling her into his arms with a force that drove the air from her lungs. His hands moved over her face, her shoulders, checking for injuries while trembling like he'd never trembled facing death himself. I'm sorry. The words came out broken. I'm so sorry. You should have stayed far from me. You should have never. I don't want to be far from you. Imani grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. Do you hear me? I don't want to be far from you. Police sirens wailed in the distance. Min-jun appeared in the doorway. Sir, we need to leave. Now. They ran through smoke and ruins, Seo-Jin's hand locked around hers like he'd never let go again. The safe house was a condo in Buckhead, anonymous, secure, stocked for emergencies. Seo-Jin sat Imani on the bathroom counter and cleaned her wounds with hands that had killed men an hour ago but were gentle now, careful, shaking slightly. You escaped on your own, he said softly, bandaging her wrists. You freed yourself. I had good motivation to survive. He looked up, and she saw everything he couldn't say written in his eyes. Imani. I'm late, she whispered. My period. I'm 3 weeks late. His hands stilled. You think? I don't know. But maybe. She touched his face. And I'm not sorry. Even with everything. I'm not sorry. Seo-Jin pulled her close, buried his face in her hair, and let himself feel the terror he'd been suppressing. She was alive. She might be carrying his child. And his world had just become infinitely more dangerous and infinitely more worth protecting. 2 days later, the pregnancy test showed 2 pink lines. Imani stared at them in the safe house bathroom while Seo-Jin waited outside the door, a man who'd faced death without flinching, now terrified of 2 small lines. It's positive, she said, opening the door. He looked at her, then at the test, then back at her. How do you feel? Terrified. Happy. Confused. Imani laughed, the sound slightly hysterical. I'm pregnant by a crime boss I've known for 6 weeks. My life is insane. Our life. He pulled her close. If you want it to be. Before she could answer, Min-jun entered with 2 men dragging a third between them. Darius looked smaller than Imani remembered, his confidence stripped away by fear. We found him trying to leave the city, Min-jun reported. He sold your location to Kong. $15,000 for information that nearly got you killed. Darius's eyes found Imani's, pleading. I didn't know they'd hurt you. I swear, I just thought. You thought what? Imani's voice was cold. That selling information about me to dangerous men would end well? That the money was worth my life? I needed it. You left me with nothing. I left you? The words came out sharp as glass. You were cheating. Stealing from me. Using me for 3 years while I worked myself to death. But I loved you. You loved what I could give you. Imani turned to Seo-Jin. What happened to him? That's your choice. Seo-Jin's voice was neutral, but his eyes promised violence if she asked for it. He put you in danger. Sold you to my enemies. In my world, that has one answer. Imani looked at Darius, this man she'd loved, planned a future with, believed in. She felt nothing but pity for how small he'd always been. Let him go. Darius's relief was palpable. Thank you. I'm not done. Her voice cut him off. You get your life. That's more than you deserve. But you're broke, Darius. Every account is frozen. Every asset seized. You get to live with the consequences of treating people like transactions. Seo-Jin nodded to his men. They dragged Darius out, his protests fading into the night. You're merciful, Seo-Jin observed. I'm choosing peace. Imani touched her stomach. For our baby. For us. But peace was a luxury they didn't have yet. The attack came at dawn, 6 men, professional and silent, sent by Seo-Jin's uncle and soul who saw Imani as weakness and the pregnancy as unacceptable dilution of the family bloodline. They breached the safe house with military precision. Seo-Jin's team responded instantly, Min-jun taking a point while Seo-Jin pushed Imani into the panic room. But one assassin made it through, his gun aimed at Seo-Jin's back. The shot rang out. Seo-Jin spun, returning fire, but the bullet had found his shoulder. He dropped to one knee, blood spreading across his shirt. No! Imani burst from the panic room, her nursing instincts overriding fear. She dragged him to cover while gunfire rattled above them. Her hands worked automatically, pressure on the wound, elevate the arm, check for exit wounds. You should have stayed hidden, Seo-Jin gasped. Shut up. Let me work. Her hands were steady now, doing what she'd been trained for. You're not dying. Not today. Not even if I have anything to say about it. The firefight ended. Min-jun cleared the space, 6 bodies left behind. But Imani had already stabilized Seo-Jin, her scrubs soaked with his blood, her skills saving the man who'd saved her. Later, while she stitched his shoulder with supplies Min-jun retrieved, Seo-Jin made a phone call to Seoul. His uncle answered with cold formality. I'm stepping back from active operations, Seo-Jin announced. Min-jun assumes control of the Seoul territory. I maintain an advisory position only. Would you abandon your birthright for a woman? No. Seo-Jin looked at Imani, his eyes holding everything words couldn't capture. I'm choosing my future over my past. Try to come for us again, and there won't be enough of your empire left to bury. He ended the call. Choose love over power. Choose life over legacy. 6 months transformed everything. Imani walked across Emory University's nursing school campus, her belly round with 7 months of pregnancy, textbooks balanced against her hip. Students rushed past between classes, none of them knowing the woman in scrubs had survived kidnapping, violence, and loving a man who'd ruled an empire built on fear. She slid into her seat in advanced pharmacology, the lecture hall filled with future nurses who shared her dream. Professor Chen began discussing cardiac medications, and Imani took notes with hands that no longer trembled, that had stitched gunshot wounds and held life together when everything fell apart. Her tuition was paid in full. Seo-Jin had insisted, and she'd learned to accept help without shame. This was a partnership. This was love that built rather than took. After class, she found him waiting by his car, not the bulletproof Mercedes with tinted windows, but a simple BMW, black but unremarkable. He wore jeans and a sweater instead of tailored suits. 2 guards waited at a distance, concession to danger that never fully disappeared, but nothing like the army that used to surround him. How was class? He opened her door, his hand instinctively moving to her belly. Our daughter kicked through the entire cardiovascular lecture. Imani smiled. I think she's going to be stubborn like her father. God help us both. They drove to their new home in Decatur, a renovated craftsman with a porch swing and neighbors who waved without knowing their past. The nursery was painted soft yellow, filled with furniture Seo-Jin had assembled himself, cursing in Korean at instructions that made no sense. Min-jun had called that morning. Business in Seoul was stable. The transition of power had held. Seo-Jin's uncle had made peace, recognizing that splitting the syndicate would benefit no one. Seo-Jin advised remotely, his legend growing larger in absence, but his days of bloodshed were finished. "Where are we going?" Imani asked as he drove past their house. "You'll see." The hospital rooftop at sunset, their place, where dawn meetings had turned into something neither could name but both had needed. Atlanta spread below them in shades of gold and shadow, the city where everything had changed. Seo-Jin stood behind her, arms wrapped around her middle, hands resting on their daughter who moved beneath his palms. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "Giving up your empire?" "I didn't give up on anything." His voice was quiet, certain, more peaceful than she'd ever heard it. "I found everything that matters. You. Our daughter. A life where I sleep without expecting assassination. Mornings without blood on my hands." He turned her to face him. "I found myself, Imani. The man I was supposed to be before violence became my inheritance." She kissed him as the sun painted the sky in colors that felt like promises, orange and pink and gold, beauty emerging from darkness. Later, at home, Imani's phone glowed with their text history. She scrolled to the very beginning, to the message that started everything, *, "Baby, I need you right now. I'm wet. *. She smiled at her own desperation, at the cosmic accident that had saved her life by changing it completely. Her finger hovered over delete. "Keep it," Seo-Jin said from the doorway. "Remember that the best things sometimes come from mistakes." It wasn't a mistake. Imani set the phone down, moved into his arms. It was fate disguised as error. The universe knows what we needed before we did. Outside, Atlanta continued its evening rhythm, millions of people living millions of stories, most of them ordinary, forgettable. But on a rooftop 6 months ago, and in a wrong number sent in loneliness, 2 people had found something extraordinary. Sometimes the wrong message finds exactly the right person. And sometimes love is worth every dangerous, beautiful, impossible risk.